The moment I realized my husband had caught me, my heart all but seized in my chest. There he stood, frozen in the living room doorway, his face set in a mask of shock and betrayal. My pulse pounded and time felt unbearably slow. I wanted to speak, to grovel for forgiveness, but the words refused to form. He stared at me as if I were someone he'd never met, eyes cold, distant, trembling with hurt. I opened my mouth to explain, but he turned on his heel and walked away without a word. Ever since, he's treated me like a stranger, and the silence is devouring me from the inside. I never imagined such loneliness could exist in a marriage that once felt so secure. I'm not proud of what I did. Even now, trying to piece together how it happened makes my head spin. We'd been married for almost 7 years, college sweethearts who beat the odds. When we exchanged vows, I genuinely believed we could weather anything. But somewhere along the line we drifted. Or maybe I did. It's so easy to blame intangible forces, to say we drifted. In truth, I lost my sense of myself in the monotony of everyday life. My husband, Damien, worked long hours, sometimes bringing the stress home. I busied myself with chores and part-time work, occasionally feeling overshadowed by his accomplishments and our circle's expectations. But that's no excuse for what I did. It only explains how I let the door crack open for temptation. I guess I wanted to feel desired again, to recapture the thrilling spark that once accompanied romance. An old friend from high school messaged me out of the blue, just a casual, "How have you been?" The conversation felt innocent. We reminisced about the past, swapped stories about where life had taken us. But soon those messages turned flirtatious. He'd compliment my photos, calling me beautiful, asking if I missed the fun we used to have. Flattery is a powerful drug, especially when you're starved for attention. Before I knew it, a part of me craved his messages more than I cared to admit. A line was crossed when we agreed to meet for coffee. Just coffee, I told myself. It can't hurt, but it did. That simple meeting led to more. We discovered we had a chemistry that reawakened my dormant longing for passion. The day we first kissed, I recall my heart hammering with guilt and exhilaration. I knew it was wrong, yet a reckless part of me justified it. I told myself I wasn't truly hurting anyone if it stayed a secret, if it was just a fleeting fling. But small lies multiply quickly, and soon we were sneaking around more often. My friend, let's call him Joel, would text me at odd hours and I'd find excuses to step outside or run errands. The weight of duplicity began pressing on me, but each time I considered confessing, I imagined Damien's face crumpling in heartbreak. So I stayed silent. The day my husband caught me was as ordinary as any other. I had invited Joel over to watch a movie while Damien was supposedly away on a work trip for the weekend. But a cancelled meeting brought Damien home a day early. He walked in to find us tangled on the couch. The memory is seared into my mind. Joel scrambling to find his shirt, me stammering nonsense, and Damien just standing there, silent, tears starting to fill his eyes. He didn't shout or lunge. He just stared with a devastation so profound I almost wished he'd lash out. Then wordlessly he turned and walked out the door. Joel attempted to stammer out an apology, but I was too stunned to respond. My entire world collapsed in that moment. That I tried calling Damien repeatedly, leaving frantic voicemails. That entire evening I paced the house, our house, heart in my throat. He never came back that night. Our bed felt cavernous, every shadow a reminder of what I'd done. By the next morning I was frantic. I called his phone so many times it eventually went straight to voicemail. Friends and family had no clue where he was. I worried about his safety, imagining him driving aimlessly, consumed by rage or sorrow. Guilt hammered me when he finally returned 2 days later. He was calm, eerily so. He walked in, looked around as if memorizing the walls, and said, "I'll stay in the guest room." Then he proceeded to act as though I barely existed. No arguments, no pleas for explanation, just a cold detachment that left me reeling. I wanted to talk, to apologize, to beg, but he retreated into himself. The children, we have 2 kids, ages 6 and 4, sensed the tension. They asked me why Daddy was sleeping in a different room. I tried to deflect, claiming Daddy needed quiet. But the older one, our daughter, seemed unconvinced. She watched me with worried eyes, as though suspecting something deeply wrong. Each day after that felt like stepping into a silent war zone. Damien rose early, left for work before I saw him. In the evenings he barely spoke. If we needed to coordinate about the kids, he'd text me from across the house or deliver short, clipped phrases. The house lost all warmth. Even the kids, who used to bound around with laughter, grew subdued, unsure how to handle their father's new coldness. I tried cornering him once, explaining how sorry I was. He brushed past me without so much as a glance. I stayed up late that night, weeping in the living room. My phone buzzed with a text from Joel asking if I was okay. I ignored it. I felt disgusted with myself, with the entire situation, that I never wanted an affair that would blow up my life. I didn't intend for the man I loved to become a stranger in our own home. The guilt weighed on me like a lead blanket. I attempted to do small acts of contrition, cooking his favorite meals, tidying up more thoroughly, leaving him notes. But each note remained unanswered, crumpled, or left out of place. He wore headphones around the house, immersing himself in music or podcasts, effectively blocking me out. I tried to be strong, telling myself I deserved this. But inside I was cracking, longing to talk, to fight if necessary. Anything was preferable to this oppressive silence. Our kids started acting out, sensing the rift. Our daughter refused to go to bed at night, clingy and tearful. Our son threw tantrums, something he rarely did before. Meanwhile, Damien responded with minimal engagement, as though he was physically present but emotionally absent. I found myself apologizing to the kids, feigning normalcy, but each day felt more brittle. My mother visited unexpectedly one afternoon, took in the tension, and asked me if we were having marital issues. I nearly broke down, but I was too ashamed to admit the truth. Eventually, I realized I needed to approach this systematically. I wrote Damien a letter, pouring out my regret, my willingness to do anything to fix our marriage. I asked him to read it when he felt ready. Then I left it on his bedside table. He read it, I assume, because it disappeared from the table, but he never acknowledged it. The next morning I found it in the trash bin, crumpled. My heart shattered all over again. That was the day I fully grasped that he might never speak to me about it, that maybe this silent punishment would continue indefinitely. Desperate, I sought therapy alone. The counselor was kind but firm. If Damien refused to engage, we couldn't do couples therapy. We could only work on me, my guilt, my desire to atone, my acceptance of the consequences. She suggested I keep journaling my feelings, that I might need to consider the possibility that our marriage was irreparably damaged. The notion terrified me. I wanted to fix it, but how could I if he refused to utter more than 3 words a day? I recognized that his silent treatment was a form of coping. He was deeply wounded, possibly beyond the reach of talk or apologies. I tried to understand that. At the same time, I felt a growing sense of resentment. I'd messed up, yes, but a tiny voice inside me wondered if he realized how excruciating it was to live like this. Did he think of me as human anymore, or just a vile traitor? One evening I discovered him tidying the guest room. Summoning courage, I stood in the doorway, arms folded, voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I pleaded. He didn't turn around, didn't pause what he was doing. For a moment I thought he might speak, but instead he closed the dresser drawer and walked out, brushing past me as though I didn't exist. My tears spilled over. The refusal stung more than if he'd screamed at me. At least screaming would mean he still felt something. This emptiness was killing me. In quiet moments, I'd recall how we used to share everything. Silly jokes, random facts about our day. We had a secret handshake we taught the kids. Now he barely looked me in the eye. The nights were the worst, alone in the bed we once shared. Sometimes I'd wake at 2 a.m., heart pounding with nightmares, only to find the house silent, him presumably awake in another room. I'd tiptoe out, see the glow of the TV or his phone screen under the door, but no invitation to come closer. He'd turned me into a ghost in our own marriage. Joel tried contacting me a few times, claiming he felt guilty for the turmoil. I blocked him eventually, not wanting any more reminders of my betrayal. I realized I no longer cared about that fling. I never truly loved him. It was an impulsive quest for attention. Now I was paying the steepest price possible, losing the love that truly mattered. The question ate at me: was it truly irreparable? Did I do this for good, or could we salvage a scrap? Some nights I fantasized about leaving. If my husband refused to talk, maybe it was better I took the kids and parted ways. But the thought of uprooting them from their father's presence, even a silent presence, felt wrong. So I endured the stifling environment, hoping maybe time would erode his bitterness. Another part of me recognized that living in silent torment was no life for any of us. At last, I reached a breaking point. Our daughter had a school play and I asked if he'd attend. He shrugged, not responding. On the day of the play he left the house and I assumed he was going to meet us there. But he never showed. Our daughter scanned the audience, searching for him. When I got home, furious, I found him in the living room reading a book as if nothing happened. My anger erupted. I shouted how he'd let our daughter down. He stared at me for a moment, then returned to his book. That moment shattered any lingering illusions I had. I realized he was punishing me not just by shutting me out, but by neglecting his fatherly duties. The kids were collateral damage in his silent war. I realized it couldn't continue. That evening, I penned him a final letter stating if he didn't agree to at least discuss a path forward, counseling, separation, something, I'd move out. I poured out my sorrow and frustration, explaining how his silence was strangling our family. Then I left the note on the kitchen table. The next morning it was gone. But again, no verbal reply. He left for work. My heart sank. Another day of ignoring me. By nightfall, I confronted him, exasperated. I can't live like this, I said, voice wobbling. I've begged, I've apologized, but you treat me like I'm invisible. Please say something. He glanced at me, eyes flat. For the first time in weeks, he actually spoke more than a few words. What else is there to say? He asked, voice devoid of emotion. You killed everything. My chest tightened. We have kids, I whispered. We can't just stop living. If you want a divorce, say it. If you want me gone, say it. But don't keep me in this limbo. He shrugged. Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore. Then he turned away. The cruelty of his indifference stung deeper than any shouting match that night. Tears stained my pillow until dawn. The next morning I called Mona, sobbing about how lost I felt. She offered me a place to stay, at least temporarily, so I could find clarity. I realized it was what I had to do, for the kids, for my own sanity. This silent vendetta might go on indefinitely, slowly poisoning our household. If he wanted to see me as a monster, so be it. But I wouldn't subject our children to that toxic environment. They needed a stable space free of daily tension and unspoken rage. So, the following week, while he was out, I packed suitcases for myself and the kids, loaded them into my car, and left a brief note. I can't stay where I'm not wanted. If you ever decide you want to fix this for real, let me know. Until then, the kids and I will be at Mona's. My hands shook writing that final line. I worried about how it might affect the children, but living under a roof of hostility seemed worse. Before I left, I took one last look around the house. Photos on the walls, our wedding picture smiling from a dusty frame. My stomach twisted with regret, but I forced myself out the door. At Mona's place, I explained the situation to the kids in gentle terms. My daughter cried, missing her dad. I tried calling him, urging him to speak to them, but he didn't answer. In the next few days he texted me only once. Fine, do what you want. No mention of the kids, no mention of trying to fix things. That final bit of detachment broke my heart anew. I realized he might be too wounded to function, or maybe he was punishing me by ignoring everything dear to me. Either way, it cemented my decision to stay away. I filed for an official separation, hoping maybe that legal step would jolt him into some clarity. Instead, I heard nothing. It was as if I never existed. As the weeks turned into months, I tried to adapt. The kids settled into a routine at Mona's place, though they asked daily about Dad. I tried to keep bitterness out of my voice, telling them their father just needed time. Occasionally, at night, I stared at the phone, half hoping for a text from him, some sign he wanted to talk. Instead, radio silence. My attempts at contact fell on deaf ears. I wrestled with guilt, sorrow, and the faint anger that he was letting our marriage crumble without a fight, all because of my mistake. But the rational part of me recognized that I couldn't force him to forgive or engage. The damage was done. I found a part-time job to support the kids, leaning heavily on Mona's generosity. My father, upon learning the truth about my affair, was disappointed, but he still offered me emotional backing. My mother cried when I told her how Damien refused to speak. Yet no one could truly fix this for me. My therapist said we both needed closure, but it was impossible if he refused any contact. So I trudged forward, focusing on the kids, forging a stable routine, ignoring the persistent ache in my chest. Months later, a friend mentioned seeing Damien around town, looking thin and withdrawn. Rumors suggested he might be spiraling, but he'd always been too proud to seek help. My heart clenched with sympathy but also frustration. If he needed help, why not talk to me or someone close? This ongoing silent resentment only deepened the wedge. Another friend told me he'd moved into a smaller apartment, that our old house was up for sale. He'd apparently never told me, perhaps out of bitterness. I only found out through gossip. The final blow was hearing that he might plan to move out of state once the house sold. The idea that he'd vanish from our children's lives spurred me to attempt one final contact. I called, texted, emailed, asking for a chance to discuss co-parenting or custody. The response was an envelope in my mailbox containing a short note. Do whatever you want with the kids. I won't stop you. Don't contact me again. No signature, just the raw sting of rejection. I broke down reading it, tears of rage and sorrow. My worst fear, that my betrayal would cost our kids their father, had come true. I recognized the profound damage done to him, But his refusal to even be a father was a cruelty I couldn't fathom today. A year has passed since I walked out of the house. My husband remains a ghost, ignoring any olive branch or attempt at co-parenting. The divorce is final, awarding me full custody by default. He never even showed up to contest it. The kids ask about him less frequently now, having adapted in a heartbreaking way. I enrolled them in a new school, found a modest apartment we can call home. We've begun healing, though the scars linger. My therapist says I must release the guilt at some point, but that's easier said than done. I still glance at my phone sometimes, remembering the warmth we once shared, longing for at least a conversation. But that yearning is matched by the memory of his cold, silent gaze, the punishing freeze-out that followed my betrayal. That I understand I triggered this meltdown by cheating. My affair was the catalyst. Yet his response, completely shutting me out, becoming a stranger, speaks to a depth of hurt I hadn't imagined possible. I used to dream about eventually reconciling, but I've accepted it likely won't happen. He's retreated into his shell, condemning me to exist outside his world, the mother of his children he refuses to acknowledge. Maybe one day time will soften his bitterness, but I can't hold my breath that at the end of it all, I remain full of regret. Cheating is a wound that doesn't just vanish with an apology. I wish I could turn back the clock, find a better way to handle my dissatisfaction rather than sneaking around. But regrets don't unmake consequences. I've learned a brutal lesson. Once trust is shattered, some people refuse to salvage anything. They recoil so hard that all that's left is emptiness. My husband's choice to treat me like a stranger, someone not worth a single word, hurts me daily. But I have to move forward, focus on giving our children a life not overshadowed by mistakes and silent vendettas, and so, day by day, I'm rebuilding. The sorrow might never fully disappear, but each sunrise is an opportunity to strive for redemption in my own eyes, to ensure I never repeat those mistakes. I haven't heard from him in months, suspecting he's relocated. I can't force him to be part of the kids' lives if he's determined to vanish. All I can do is ensure they know they're loved, that I made a mistake and face the aftermath. It's a lonely path, learning to navigate single parenthood with the burden of heartbreak, but I try to keep hope alive that I'll become a better version of myself through the pain. People occasionally ask if I hate him for cutting me off so drastically. No, I don't. I'm angry at times, sure, but I also respect that I inflicted a wound so deep it might never mend. His silent fury is his way of coping. Part of me forgives him for that. Another part mourns the love we once had. Love can't survive in a vacuum of silence, though. Without communication, everything crumbles. That's the final irony. Had we talked before I strayed, maybe we'd have found solutions. Instead, I cheated and he responded with absolute withdrawal. Now, our marriage is dust in the wind. That if he ever finds it in his heart to speak to me, to co-parent our children at least, I'd welcome the chance. But I won't cling to illusions anymore. I must stand on my own, ensuring the kids feel safe and cherished regardless of his absence. That's the best I can do, live with my regret, grow from my error, and continue forward. The silence in the house at night is harsh, but I'm learning to fill it with the soft hum of a new life. The echo of his love has faded, replaced by the memory of that unwavering, punishing gaze the day he discovered the truth. He's gone, emotionally if not physically, and I have to accept it that I made a grave mistake, and I'll carry that knowledge always. Yet I deserve a chance to forgive myself, to find a path that doesn't revolve around his cold verdict. The kids deserve a mother who's present, not perpetually drowning in remorse. So I wake each morning, take a breath, and remind myself that I'm still here, still standing despite the devastation. If he wants to treat me like a stranger, that's his choice. I can't take it anymore, but I can't change him either. All I can do is gather my strength, hold my children close, and keep walking forward into a future of my own making.